Okay, we are live now. Beniamino, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to the closing keynote panel of ICCSA2020. Good afternoon to all Europe and Africa. Good morning to North and South America, and good evening to Asia and Australia. Okay, I'm very honored to be discussing this important session. We have a very important guest this afternoon. Okay, 7 years ago, the Italian programmer Alberto Brandolini tweeted the bullshit asymmetry principle, also known as Brandolini law. The amount of energy needed to refute bullshit is an order of magnitude bigger than produce it. During the lockdown, I listed a lot of theories on how to reorganize cities in pandemic era. At the beginning, the main idea was terrible, in my opinion, to fill cities with a lot of plastic barriers and a lot of nonsense. Immediately later, the debate in Italy was to redistributing population from a big city to rural villages. But 3 researches recently populated demonstrate that the density is not the key factor. The first analyzed the spread of COVID in Spain and has been published in geographical analysis. The second investigated about the diffusion of outbreaks in USA, published in International Journal of American Planning Association. The third, developed in Italy, developed by me, Giuseppe Boruso, Ginevra Valletto, and other 2 colleagues of Medicine Faculty of Sassari, published recently in Sustainability. This means that the topic of post-pandemic city cannot be addressed by just simple ideas, opinion, etc., but analyzing all possible aspects in a very detailed way. To this time, we decided to organize the closing keynote panel of ICCSA 2020 conference, inviting some of the most important experts in this field. Denise Pumain from University Paris 1, Pantheon-Sorbonne, Michael Batty from the University College of London, Alexis Tsoukias from LabSAD University of Paris. In order to produce an interesting debate, we have also 3 discussants. Liliana Zirkovic, Ministry of Construction, Transport and Infrastructure of Serbia, Małgorzata Hans from University of Lodz, also Vice President of ISOCAS, Giovanni Fusco from University of Côte d'Azur. And the main aim is to produce an interesting debate, trying to reject the bullshit in this case, thinking about the future without predicting it, because as Niels Bohr said, prediction is very difficult, especially about the future. Now, I don't want to waste more time. I give the microphone to Liliana Zirkovic, who will introduce Alexis Tsoukias.
Thank you, Beniamino, for this nice introduction. And in order to continue with the talks of our eminent guests, I would present the first speaker. This is Professor Alexis Tsoukias, who is a CNRS Research Director at LAMSAD, the Laboratory for Analysis and Modeling of Systems for Decision Support at the Paris Dauphine University, which is the part of the PSL University. He is also coordinator of the Peace Studies Master at the same university. Professor Tsoukias was director of the LAMSAD laboratory until 2018 and also national coordinator of the Policy Analytics Research Network. Policy analytics, besides some other subjects like multiple criteria decision analysis, non-conventional preference modeling, applied non-classical logics, ordinary mathematical programming, artificial intelligence, and decision theory are all the subjects of his research interest. Professor Tsoukias is also the co-author of the 2 books and more than 90 journal articles and book contributions. He has been vice president of the French Society of Operational Research, as well the president of EURO, the European Association of Operational Research Societies. With this short bio, I would just stop, the giving more about the contribution and the academic and the achievement of Professor Tsoukias, I'll give him a floor to introduce us about the topic of numbers, emotions, and collective threats. Please, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much for being invited to this meeting, and thank you very much for considering me somebody important. I never thought about myself that way. Okay, I will try to share my presentation. Let's see what happens. No, just a moment. For some reason, it doesn't want. I don't know. We just tested it a couple of minutes before, and now it doesn't work. I really don't know how.
One thing you could do, Alexis, is maybe refresh the browser page so it will bring you back in, and maybe. Okay, you're back with us, Alexis. Let's see if now you'll be able to do it.
Okay, here it comes. Okay, here we are.
Great, fantastic.
Okay,
we can see
so
your.
sorry for this.
Yes, we can see it on the screen. So now you're on. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry for this interruption. Now, what you see here is something that, if you have been a little bit interested on what happened in the last months, perhaps you have seen it quite often. It is what it is shown by the Johns Hopkins Hospital University, which is the international collection of data about the pandemic of COVID. No? Well, if you look at this screenshot, you will see that basically there are two information which is presented here, which is on one side the number of total confirmed cases, and on the other side the total number of deaths, and this is distributed by country. No, so this is what circulates, no, about this let's say disease presently, and this is what most media report regularly. How many cases come up by day and how many people die by day? No. Now, does this communicate something important? Well, medically speaking, probably yes, but in terms of policy, not. In the sense that it tells us nothing about how this disease evolves. We know that it spreads, we know that it kills, but that's all. It doesn't tell us if it goes fast, if it goes slow. We cannot compare a country with another. Why? Because this data that we are seeing are not a statistic. No? What do I mean by that? This is a statistic. This is the intensive care unit admissions of a certain country from the beginning, 22 of February, to today. No? Why this is a statistic? Because this observes 100% of the observable phenomenon, and also because this is comparable with what other countries will do, since being admitted in an intensive care unit is a standard. No? So internationally, you end in an intensive care unit for the same reasons if you are affected by this disease. No? Which means that if I see this figure and this figure, which is another country, I can compare them. So I can say that this country had a smallest impact, and this had the largest impact. I can say, for instance, that in the two countries, the disease moved in the same way. No, I can see that the impact of the lockdown happened exactly 2 weeks after in both countries. No, and things like that. These two graphics, no, are statistics. This information is nothing. No. Now, what is the difference? The difference is that in the first case, we just have an empirical observation of undesigned data. No? What I mean by undesigned data, it is what happens around us. Nobody designed the disease. Nobody designed the tests for observing who is ill and who is not. It just happens around us. No? We can observe this data around us, but just observing undesigned data, we do not collect information. We just collect undesigned data. No? The other one is a statistic, because, as I said, it is, although it is using undesigned data, is a statistic. No? Now, in the first case, what happens is that we have just an emotional perception of experience. In the second case, we can make meaningful inferences. No? Now, the first thing that we have to pay attention to is that whatever happens around us, no, there is a big difference between the empirical observation of what happens and a measure or a statistic. No? If we need to decide about something, about a policy, about a measure, about things that we want to do in the future, how to react to what happens around us, we don't need just empirical observation and emotional perceptions. We need to think coldly about meaningful statistics and measurements. No? Now, let's move a little bit further about that and see what did we learn observing meaningful information, and not just emotional perceptions of empirical observations. No. Now there are, let's say, three important things. No, but I will talk a little bit more about the third one. The first one was that we were not prepared to defend ourselves from something like that. No, and we were not prepared because we did the error to consider a pandemic as something impossible, although it is not the case, because pandemics happen, no, and they happen independently from us. No, we should remember this lesson and let our societies to be prepared about that. No, the other lesson we know is that our economies are not robust, because a crisis in consumption, no, dropped our economies to beyond the critical level. No, we have a welfare which is based upon excessive consumption. No, people living just regularly, consuming what they just need, dropped our societies in deep crisis. No, that means that our economies, there is something wrong in the whole thing. No, the last lesson that I think we learned is that a global collective threat, as the one we are living to, no, requires global strategies, no, using local defenses. No. Now, in that last sentence, no, the key word I want to develop a little bit is the term of collective threat. No, because if we want to build global strategies and we want to build defenses, we need to know what a global collective threat is. No? Now, until now, the meaning of a threat and was independently considered something which was individual, and a collective threat was just putting together, aggregating the individual risks or threats to the level of a collectivity. No? So we take the risk of getting one people sick, and then we multiply it by 60 million of 100 million people, and we get this collective threat. Well, unfortunately, it's not the case. No. Now, let's try to rethink about a collective threat. No. Now, a collective threat is an event which, if happens, will cause a loss of welfare, no, for a group of citizens and or a territory. No. Now, in this definition, we have to understand three big questions. The first one is how to measure welfare. If a threat is something that is going to produce a loss of welfare, we need to be able to measure appropriately welfare and say today welfare is at a certain point, and if this event occurs, we're going to lose something. No? The second thing is that we have to identify who is going to lose something. No? It is not true that everybody will lose the same thing altogether. No? There are people that are going to lose a lot, and there are people that are going to lose nothing or very little. And it's not true that everybody of us will lose the same thing. We will lose different things. So we need to know how to identify who loses what in our societies in order to understand what a loss of welfare means. And the third thing is that we need to understand and to model what is the likelihood of such events, no, and how these have to be modeled. No, so I will go very rapidly on these three things. No, now welfare and measuring welfare is not something really new. There are people that spend their lives on this topic, but there are things that we need to remember and consider in trying to modeling welfare. The first is that welfare is multidimensional. It's not a single figure. No, so it's not one number that says that our income or our level of consumption or whatever represents our welfare. Welfare is a frontier, no, of potential achievements on several different dimensions. So it is a multidimensional observable phenomenon. Second, it is something which is subjectively perceived. No, so the welfare, it is something that has an objective existence, but each of us value it differently. No, so there is a strong subjective dimension on what welfare is, and mostly of what people perceive as welfare. There is a strong dimension of freedom of choice. So welfare is not only what we have, but what we can do with what we have. And last thing, upon the welfare, there is a strong impact of what happens to the commons. No? This is much more important if we consider an impact of something happening to a common. What is the impact to a collectivity, to a group of citizens, to a society, no, of not being able to walk outside? What is the impact of losing access to a forest? What is the impact of losing access to fresh water? No, this is not something that we measure by the economic impact of consuming part of this common. No, there is a global impact on the common, and this is distributed among the citizens. So this is something we have to model specifically and differently from how we do that for other assets. Who loses? Well, if what I said about welfare is true, then that means that the way through which we have to represent the impact of, let's say, modifying the welfare in our society, it is something that implies clustering people differently. We typically cluster citizens along demographic dimensions, along geographic dimensions, occasionally along cultural dimensions. But we need, if we want to take care about welfare, to cluster them according to more aspects. One is the subjective value functions, how people subjectively value welfare. And the second one is how distributes, if welfare is something which is multidimensional, how these distributions are affected to each single citizen. No, there might be similarities. Actually, there are similarities, and there is research that shows that such similarities exist. So we need to produce such type of clustering of the citizens if we want to target by policies specific groups of citizens having specific type of demands. No. Last thing, likelihoods. No. Now, likelihoods of such threats can be purely stochastic, like it happens with earthquakes, like it happens with pandemics. But likelihoods can be also adversarial. Adversarial meaning that they could be due to the deliberate action of somebody else. Not necessarily a deliberate action against us, no, but nevertheless a deliberate action, something that has been decided by somebody to do that, no? These two different ways to consider stochasticity, so uncertainty, is extremely important, no? Distinguishing what is a law of the nature, no, in uncertainty, with respect to what it is an adversarial behavior of somebody that introduces a threat in our life, is extremely important. The other thing is that most of these threats we are talking about are extreme. What I mean by that are threats that have a very low likelihood to occur, but a huge impact. No? Pandemics do not happen every day. They happen once a century, perhaps, once every 50 years. No? But the impact can be huge. No? Now, that means that our typical way by which we compute, let's say, risks and threats and impacts, no, using uncertainties, will not fit. No? We need to use appropriate modeling tools to do that. Okay, let me conclude. There are a number of things we have to remember. First of which is meaningless information, no, as we have seen at the beginning, is useless for the type of problems we try to face. No, it can be emotional. It can help newspapers to sell more, let's say, pieces. No, it can help increasing audience, but it does not help to make decisions. Meaningful information can be useful. Modeling appropriately what we are talking about can be useful. It can be and can help in shaping and design policies. No? And the last thing is that collective threats are not the sum of individual risks. We need a whole new theory, no, about how we model and we represent collective threats. And I hope in the future to be able to present how this can be done. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor, for this short presentation. It was quite interesting. And now I give a floor to my colleague Beniamino Morgante to continue with the other talks.
Thank you, Alexis, for your stimulating presentation, for getting a lot of ideas. Now, we are organizing this way. We can have a discussion at the end of the three presentations. This means that now I give the microphone to Giovanni Fusco, who will introduce Denise Pumain.
Thank you. Well, Denise Pumain is geographer, emeritus professor at University Paris 1, Panthéon-Sorbonne. She built an evolutionary theory of urban systems, transferring concepts and models from complex systems towards the social science. She directed the research unit Géographicité, was chair of the IGU Commission on Urban Geography, PI of the ERC grant Geodiversity. She's founder and director of CyberGeo, the European Journal of Geography. And among her many publications, we can cite Hierarchy, Natural and Social Sciences, Complexity Perspectives on Innovation and the Social Science, Urban Dynamics and Simulation Models, International and Transnational Perspectives on Urban Systems, and more lately, Geographical Modeling and Theories and Models of Urbanization. She won the Vautrin Lud Prize in 2010, the silver medal of the French National Center of Scientific Research in 2010, and what is a huge achievement in France, in 2009, she was bestowed the title of Officier de la Légion d'honneur. Well, this is the official presentation of Denise Pumain, but let me say something more personal. For over 40 years, Denise Pumain was the inspiring figure for every one of us in the French-speaking community of theoretical and quantitative geography. Well, thank you so much, Denise, for being with us today. And the word is to you for presenting us deconstructing expected change in geographical systems after the pandemic.
Thank you, Giovanni, for this very kind presentation. I feel ashamed of so many compliments. Thank you, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to Benjamin Morgante and his colleague at ICCSA as well for having invited me to present in this panel session and to give me the opportunity to warmly give really a warm hello to Silvana Lombardo, who is listening to us. Well, dear Silvana and all the listeners that I can see, I will share with you my screen, hopefully successfully. Can you see it now?
Yes, Denise, we can see it.
Great. And why I'm grateful to Alexis also to have spoken about the pandemic, because my intention was to speak about what is going to happen afterwards. And we hear so many opinions, perhaps dreams, anyway, many so emotional sentences about what will be our future on the earth after this pandemic, which for some, perhaps many people, means that everything will be different afterwards. And among those opinions, mostly what is very stressing for geographers, is striking for geographers, is that people think that this is the death, the end of globalization, or at least a very strong reduction of all the networks connecting people all over the world. And the second major common assumption is about predicting a reversal of migrations from cities to rural areas and smaller towns. And if you are a geographer, if you look at the geohistory of urban systems especially, you are doubtful about such a possibility. Is it predictable, the both trends? You see, it is the first shock that our territorial and urban systems receive during their very, very long evolution. Cities were emerging some 6,000 or 8,000 years ago. And we have mapped here the evolution of their population on two subcontinents, Europe and India, over 2 centuries. And what you see with those circles was the size is proportional, or the surface is proportional to the population. You see how those urban systems are expanding in all parts of the territory, but also how the major centers appearing 2 centuries ago, more than 2 centuries ago, remain the same proportionally to the other, even if many, many new towns have filled the space. Remember, during these centuries, there was some small shocks, like the demographic transition, the Industrial Revolution, 2 world wars, which momentarily spent people to the countryside or to smaller towns. But you see that on the whole, there is a very remarkable persistency of the configuration, the spatial configuration of the geographical network of cities. And if you look at India, over 2 centuries, since the British government installed a census regularly every 10 years, and we can see that already at the beginning of 19th century, the main cities had moved from the center of India, where they were in the previous centuries, to the big little situations that you can see here with Mumbai, Chennai, and Calcutta. But over the 2 centuries, over the century, sorry, they keep also the same relative hierarchical position. And during that period, there was some as well, like of course the installation of railway, and later on in the state, the independence of the country and its partition with Pakistan. Okay, now if we think on maybe a longer period of time, we also may be struck by the incredible persistence of the local and regional organization of these urban systems, as it is the case here in Europe. Those maps are due to Céline Rosenblatt, who had the idea of connecting with a visible segment the cities that were separated by less than 25 kilometers. Cities are here urban agglomerations larger than 10,000 inhabitants for all Europe. And she did the same with a stick of 50 kilometers on this map. And on the third map, you have a stick of 150 kilometers, but for cities above 100,000 inhabitants, so 10 times larger. And what is really remarkable is that you get the same 3 different qualitatively spatial organization of very dense and with close size cities in the middle of Europe, where the unification of very large political territories happened very late in mid-19th century, whereas in the big royaume of Spain and France, which were built much before, you have some higher centralization and more contrast in the distribution, spatial distribution of cities. And in the eastern part, which was urbanized later, after 13th century, you have a more regular pattern of the spatial distribution of city. And this still exists at the end of the 20th century. So it means that the interactions, the spatial interactions that are shaping the major differences in city size and the political organization that has favored some locations and not others are have a life expectancy much longer than all the decisions that are taken locally for attracting industries or developing a specific territorial power on it. So we have worked in order to explain the explanatory processes that were behind such a very long persistency. It is not due to inertia, but it is typically a path dependence in a dynamic that is caused by the adaptive strategies of all urban stakeholders. And we can see that more precisely in the case of France. This is a factor, the first two factors of a principal component analysis, showing how the change in the composition of employment in French cities evolved over 40 years, with 4 points in time corresponding to the censuses. And you see that what is remarkable is the parallel evolution, the parallel socio-economic transformation of all those cities which go in the same direction and change their employment composition according to the improvement and change in the economic activities of the period. When you look at the evolution in the United States, which is especially different because you have a development of oil cities in the south and all the Silicon Valley and new industries to the west, but you see that the parallelism of the trajectory is also remarkable. So we have, I want detail the computational models that we have designed for simulating this development, including stochastic growth process like Gibra's model, introducing innovation and its effect, usually through a hierarchical diffusion, including in another model the effect of physical transportation systems and the types of economic change, and calibrating those models with sophisticated evolutionary algorithm and a platform enabling for distributed computing, and then improving the possible validation of such. And we are confident that the evolutionary theory of urban systems that Giovanni Fosco was reminding us about just now is indeed a valid interpretation of those observations, those empirical observations of the way cities are growing not independently, but in connection, in interactions with each other. Of course, when they emerge just after Neolithic times, their connections were not so developed, and each city was locally very dependent on the local resources and the possible events, catastrophic events of predation, epidemic probably, and predation from the neighboring cities and invasions of nomadic tribes and so on. So they slowly start growing and networking all together, but already exchanging innovations and information about it. And when this was done at the time of the Industrial Revolution, this produces those interurban interactions produced major effects in enabling a very impressive economic development joined to the demographic transition. And this expansion of urbanization was apparently without any limit. But of course, we know now with all what we have learned with climatic change that we have to take care of the limited resources of the planet. And the good news is that we have now this network of big, small, medium-sized cities everywhere that will transmit the regulations from international institutions and also bottom up from all inventions locally that will help to mitigate those climate change. And we have seen that during the pandemic, how important were the dissemination, distribution of competencies about the health system and the capability of making decisions to protect people against the virus. So we need to develop policies that will exploit in a good direction the possibility of interactions between the places to share information and to add efficiency to local systems through the network effects. And a big challenge is how this could help to reduce development gaps and inequalities, because until now what we have seen is the reverse trend. So how to try to equalize? It will not be possible to go back to villages and small towns and cities, as many people seem to believe, because we are attached to many properties that the large cities have, especially many infrastructures that are desired now by many people. And also because, at least during the beginning of this century, what we know is that in any country of the world, either less developed or very industrialized, we have always a better situation with this index of human development, which you know is combining not only GDP but information about the health of population, their life expectancy, and the level of and dissemination of education. And then I think we have to do with the city. We cannot we should not destroy them, but improve them for the welfare and good health of everybody. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Denise, for your wonderful presentation. I invite all participants also to read the editorials done by Denise Pumain on cybergeo, geographical confinement or the virtues of an experiment. And also invite all participants to read the two editorials by Michael Batty on environmental planning B, the coronavirus crisis, what will the post-pandemic city look like, and unpredictably. And now I ask to Margot Schatz to introduce Michael Batty.
Thank you, Beniamino, for this opportunity. Professor Batty has always been a role model for myself, and not just for myself. I'm sure that many people in this community share this feelings. So Michael Batty, let me introduce the professor. He is Bartlett Professor of Planning at University College London, where he is the chair of the Center of Advanced Spatial Analysis. He has worked on computer models of cities and their visualizations since the 70s. Among his recent publications, there are Cities and Complexity and Inventing Future Cities, published by the MIT Press. He was professor of city planning and dean of the School of Environmental Design at the University of Cardiff, and then director of the NCGIA and SUNY Buffalo. He is fellow of the British Academy, the Royal Society. He was awarded the CBE in the Birthday Honours List in 2004. He received the gold medal of the RGS in 2015 and the gold medal of the Royal Town Planning Institute in 2016. He is the editor of the journal Environment and Planning B, which Beniamino has just quoted. And today he's going to present the new normal, embedding social distancing into urban models. So I warmly welcome Professor Batty to talk to us. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. That doesn't mean to say that I'm going to be able to get my PowerPoint working, by the way, but let's have a go. So I'm going to try and share my screen at this point. This stuff is always tricky, whether you're using Zoom or Teams or GoToMeeting. Okay, let's have a quick look. Okay, now can everybody see my PowerPoint? Everybody?
Mike, I believe you shared the window, not your full desktop.
Okay. Okay, let's try again.
Yeah, just
Your entire screen, right?
yeah, the entire screen, right? Yeah, now we can see it.
Can you see my PowerPoint now?
Should be coming.
Can you see it?
No, not yet. At least not yet.
Well,
maybe we can do it as we did with Alexis, that you refresh your browser and then see
okay.
if it runs again.
This is just to remind us that portability of software is a myth.
Of course. Okay, Mike, welcome back. We see you.
Yeah, okay, now.
Okay, I think now should be okay. Just fire your PowerPoint. Great. You see, you shouldn't underestimate yourself, Mike.
Okay.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Everyone can see that, can they?
Yes, we can see it. It's clear.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I'm going to. Okay, let me kick off. I'm going to present as much as I can about this, and I'll probably curtail the talk because I've probably got more than 15 minutes worth of material to talk about. I'm going to talk really about how the pandemic is changing our ideas about distance. To some extent, it's not changing them. We still have the same ideas about how distance operates in a sense, but it's changing our behavior patterns because we clearly want to avoid infection in that context. So if you want to actually get this PowerPoint as a PDF, then if you go to my blog, spatialcomplexity.info, then or that particular link, which you can see on the screen, then you can get a copy of it. I'll actually tweet it tonight after the conference so that if people look at my Twitter handle, then you'll find it there. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to say a little bit about disruptive events, post-pandemic cities. And of course, Denise has just told us a lot about the dynamics of cities. And I we have a lot of agreement, I think, about what she was saying in that sense, that many of the things that have happened over the last 500 years or so on are really writ large in the way we actually organize ourselves in space in terms of cities. And I don't see these things changing dramatically. They'll change a little bit, I think, but that depends on the outcome of the pandemic, whether we can actually conquer it in some sense or limit its impact. And then I want to talk a little bit about Tobler's law. How near can we get to one another? This is really the inverse distance hypothesis, but one of the features about the pandemic is that we look at distances on many scales, of course, in a geographic and urban context. But in some senses, the most local scale is the thing that determines what we're actually going to do about the pandemic. So, for example, if you want to travel on an airplane, the same kinds of issues pertain to how you pack people on an airplane as you actually pack them in a supermarket. So that really, in a sense, begins to think about the global and the local actually beginning to link with each other in ways that we've not thought very much about before. So at this point, the very large scale and the very small scale and how we couple models together is an important point I'll make. Now, there's a whole variety of different urban models. Many people listening to me will know about these and will have worked on different models and so on. I want to say something briefly about the very fine scale, contact at the urban design scale, then a little bit about the large scale, but the short term. We're involved in an exercise building a spatial pandemic model. There are many of them being built in the UK at the moment by different research groups, but the research group led by Mark Birkin at Leeds that's involved in this. I'll tell you a little bit about that, and then something about long-term urban change in our quant model. What we can do with some of these models is to actually constrain them so that we can actually introduce different types of social distancing on a national, global level, really, introduce it locally, but look at the impact nationally in that sense. So I'll just finish by talking about that. And that represents scenarios for long-range travel determined by short-range contacts. So, and then we'll see how we go. And please, chairperson, cut me off when I get to the 15 minutes. Okay, disruptive events. Now, what has happened, I think, in our field is that over the last 40 or 50 years, we've moved from a position where we thought best cities in equilibrium to those which are far from equilibrium. Denise and her group have done an awful lot on this over the years, which are looking at the dynamics of cities. And in some senses, discontinuity is familiar to us, but the sort of discontinuity that's happened with this pandemic is something that we really, in a sense, never prepared for. If you look at our models, then we talk about networks, we talk about breaks in networks, you know, hubs being constrained or clapped down and so on in that sense. But we don't talk about entire systems being changed in this sense, and that's really what's been happening in terms of the so-called lockdown, which has happened in most Western, most industrialized countries, indeed most world countries. So, for example, in the UK, 80% of people are working from home still, more or less. There's been a decline in 20% in GDP in April alone. The government are funding about 30% of all employment. That's a really major issue as to what happens when the lockdown is released and so on. So these are the kind of things that have really closed down our networks completely in that sense. So bringing the economy out of lockdown is really a major issue in some senses. How do we restore, to some extent, a semblance of actually people going to work and being entertained and so on, in terms of what the old normal was like in that sense. So these are the kind of issues in this particular way. So how can we actually think about these questions of distance and the fact that we need to remain much more apart to avoid infection? And there's a whole set of issues surrounding that, of course. But how do we think about these in the context of, you know, the immediate future, the middle term future, even the long term future, because we don't know how long the pandemic is going to go on in some senses. To some extent, it appears already that it's much more long-lived than people might have expected in some sense. I'm not talking here about the fact that it might take a year or so for vaccines to become available. I'm talking about, you know, the impact of how we think about this whole question of social distancing and so on. And of course, prior to the Industrial Revolution, where there were really very few technologies to enable us to move. We moved about 6 miles a day. At the moment, if you look at modern cities, then on average, people travel about 1 hour a day in a sense. So time and space have been substituted for one another, the annihilation of distance in this context. And this is, generally speaking, in modern cities, a function of motorized transport in that sense. So really, the big issue is how do we begin to think about occupying small spaces so that we can self-distance. In Britain, it's about 1 meter, they reckon. I'll come on to the question in a moment about what we know about the virus, which indeed is very little, as various people have said in this meeting so far. The density of how we use vehicles, for example, how many people can we pack into small spaces, etc. This has enormous implications at all scales for how we will travel in that sense. And in some senses, one of the kind of obvious things, and I think Denise made this point, and Alexis did too, that the notion about sprawl versus the compact city is very much back on the agenda in terms of this. Because, for example, you can think of the 19th century as people moving to the city, and the 20th century as people moving out of the city. And then in the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a slow but discernible move back to the city in some sense, the sort of, you know, smart growth, etc. in the United States, the sort of limitation to some extent of sprawl in that sense. Of course, this is being turned on its head because although people are beginning to walk more because they're scared of mass transit, they are avoiding mass transit and probably will do for some substantial time. And mass transit is to some extent not very feasible economically and hasn't been for, you know, many years, in fact, for you know, 50 or more years. And in that sense, people are taking to their cars. So you have these two sort of, you know, counteracting trends, one to move locally in a sense, the other to move to a car, which is actually protected in some sense. So, for example, excellent example of this is myself. I live in central London. I live in a flat. I can walk to work, basically, but my car is out at my house, 100 miles away, basically. I need my car to get there. I don't want to go by train, etc., because of the issue about the infection and so on. So all of these things come colliding, really, together in terms of thinking about what we do. Okay, let me, and this to some extent is really saying mass transit is going to be a problem in the immediate and medium term future in that sense. Okay, so let me say something a little bit about, I'm going to flip over this and say a little bit about how we can think about distance in the context of our models. So Tobler's law basically is the inverse distance law to some extent that really dominates most of the things that we do in terms of traveling over space in that sense. So Tobler himself said in a paper in 1970, in quite an off-the-cuff type of way, he said everything is related to everything else, but near things are related, more related than distant things. And of course, I don't think for 1 minute that Waldo thought that this would take on as, you know, Tobler's first law of geography, as it called. I think Mike Goodchild probably is the person who, and Don Janelle, who pushed this idea. But anyway, it's a very convenient shorthand to thinking about things in that sense. So if we look at any location as a destination and the numbers of people traveling towards it, etc., it falls with the travel cost or distance in this context. So that's an equation that we're all familiar with. It's a sort of inverse relationship between travel cost and the amount of travel. And there's a picture of it in that sense. And clearly, as we change the slope, you get more travel in this context. If we add up all of the people under the curve who are traveling from these different distances to their destination, which might be the city centre, we add them all up in that sense, then that gives us a total. And obviously, when this curve begins to shift, as we change the technologies, when it flattens basically in a sense, and the next picture shows it flattening in this particular way, then more and more people are traveling. So the top line might be what happens in somewhere like Los Angeles. The bottom line might be somewhere that happens in a much smaller, constrained, low car ownership type of society in that sense. So that's been the logic between many of our models in that sense. Okay, so let me move on. Now, of course, these models are really showing us how far we can actually travel in this particular context. When we actually get to the point where we actually meet up, basically, once we've actually moved according to these sort of general principles, and we load ourselves into a place, then there are local interactions. So, for example, if you have 100 people coming into a space, then potentially there might be 100 squared interactions that would take place over the space, basically. But nevertheless, there is an economy of agglomeration by more and more people coming into the space in that sense. And a lot of our theories have been based in some sense on this. And so that's really saying that we can work out in very simple terms, what that actually means in terms of people coming in. So in other words, if we have 25 people entering a space, we have 25 squared spatial interactions, which are 625. Now, only a small proportion of these might be significant. We think of that as being a measure to some of the infection. It's not just infection, it's innovative interaction, really. Then in some senses, what we're saying, in fact, is that this is a measure of the infection in that sense. And what we want to know is what it actually means. Now, if we have a very small proportion of people infecting in that sense, then the infection will relate to the rate of the numbers in that sense. So I've worked out a few things there about what happens if you have a certain level of infection and so on and so forth. Okay, now, of course, in some senses, that's really only the beginning of the story. What then happens, of course, is that in a small space, so if this were, for example, a supermarket, for example, if you cough, then, of course, the virus, if you're infected, the virus will spread in this way. And this is where, surprisingly, we know very, very little about what's actually happening. So we assume, and I think this is fairly well established, that the infection would decline with distance away from one another. So, for example, dependent on this social distancing rule, if it's 2 meters or 1 meters, they say in the UK that a 1 meter rule gives you 100%, 10 times as great a probability of being infected than a 2 meter rule in that sense. But of course, in many senses, in these open spaces, there are other things in these spaces, there are other things that are actually happening. So, for example, ventilation is all important in this particular context. So really, if we think of our models as moving people to places, when they get to these places, then how the virus disperses, in that sense, and the ventilation involved, the number of people passing each other, which is mixing up the air, all of these things are extremely important in terms of working out the infection. And we know, I think, that inside of buildings we're much more likely to get infected than outside of buildings because of these dispersions and so on. So this is what I mean by connecting all our models together. Now, let me race on. Let me have a quick look. I'm just going to go out of this for 1 minute. And have a look. Okay, so Chairman, I'll have another. Oops, where are we? Another 5 minutes or so, if you don't mind. But okay, so we're really talking about the very large scale and the very small scale coming together in some sense. And typically, we've not really done this much with our models. We've not really looked at metropolitan regional models and thought about, what happens at the very fine scale. But of course, in the context of this pandemic, where we're changing things at the very small scale, it has repercussions right across the scales in this particular context. So capacity limits in small spaces are all important in terms of thinking about how our models might be able to articulate. I'm not saying predict, because as various people have said, we can't predict, but we can use these things to actually explore possibilities in some senses. Okay, now different varieties of urban model. Let me tell you very quickly about the sort of urban models that we've been working with a little bit. And I won't tell you the detail, but I'll tell you what we've been doing with them. We've looked at some very fine scale models. I'm involved in a group in the UK in the Royal Society, which is looking at human behavior in small spaces, so supermarkets, malls, train stations, and so on. There's another group building a large scale short-term models of the spatial pandemic, and then our own model, which is our workhorse in CASA called Quant, which is really a land use transport model of England, Scotland, and Wales, can actually be used to think about in terms of the pandemic. So here, for example, is a picture of supermarkets. That's the fine scale. Say something about it in a moment. The spatial epidemic modelling has been developed for a county of Devon in southwest, but can be applied elsewhere in the UK, because there is a microsimulation model driving it really for the UK that's developed by people at Leeds. And lastly, our quant model, which covers England, Scotland and Wales. So all of these models can be tweaked, if you like, to think about the impact of the pandemic. So here's the supermarket stuff. This actually is a supermarket. It's one of the, well, I probably shouldn't say the name of it, because the supermarket chain in question has said that the group involved in this, not me, but the group involved are not able to publish their findings, because they've discovered that in one-way systems which have been developed in supermarkets by this chain and many other chains, that this can actually increase the infection, the one-way system. So a lot of counterintuitive effects about people bumping into each other and, you know, mixing of air and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, that's the kind of thing. There's a big supermarket there that they've worked with, and these little red dots give you an indication of where people are more likely to be infected in some sense. So the notion is, in this kind of world, we need to work at this level about people moving in small spaces, and then how they're coupled really together, excuse me, how they're coupled to questions about movement and ventilation and the placing of products and obstacles and so on. All of this kind of stuff does indeed make a difference. And I should say that it would appear that in supermarkets, the possibility of an infection is relatively low compared to places where people spend a lot of time. So although children appear to be less susceptible to the pandemic, they spend a lot of time together in classrooms and so on. So there are some big issues about the viral load and the amount of time involved in these sorts of things. Okay, the model that we're building of the spatial pandemic is basically 4 or 5 groups of people. Leeds, building the microsimulation demographic model. We're building the retail and schools and hospital models, and the Martin Centre of Cambridge are building the Journey to Work model, and the epidemiological stuff is all done by the University of Exeter. So these models, in fact, that's a block model of the of the kind of thing that we're actually doing, plugging these things together. It's quite a challenge to do this sort of using Zoom and all of this online stuff without actually meeting, really, in some sense. But in some senses, that's the model that's under development at the moment, and it produces things that you would expect. We can simulate the pandemic, we can seed it in different ways and so on. And of course, one of the interesting features in this model is that because we have several spatial interaction models moving people around, then to some extent, that's how the infection actually spreads in terms of its dispersion. And there are some pictures from that. Last but not least, we have this model called Quant, which is for England, Scotland and Wales. We built it over the last 2 or 3 years for infrastructure planning, really, to look at things like HS2, Crossrail, some of these big projects, of course, which are now under severe doubt, I think, in this sense. But our Prime Minister has promised us lots of money for infrastructure, in Keynesian style, to actually get the economy recovering, etc., in some senses. But nevertheless, what we're doing in that context, I'm just going to whip through these basically. This is called Quant, and it works at England, Scotland and Wales. That's just England and Wales. Various reasons began in that sense. We can actually plug in changes into the model, and it runs in real time on the web. Anybody can run it in that sense. Very detailed networks, road and rail. And this is important in terms of how we're actually using it in that sense. So let me look at one scenario. Okay, the model effectively is an interaction model, or the component we're looking at here is a spatial interaction model of movement between work and home in that sense. And it's a 3-mode model: road, rail and bus. And if, for example, the modes, I should say, compete. So, for example, if you put high-speed rail in there, then that will change travel times and people will be attracted to high-speed rail within certain obvious limits in that sense. If, for example, you reduce the capacity through social distancing for rail, for example, and it looks like the train system in Britain cannot operate at more than about 25% capacity, to even include things like 1 meter social distancing. And what we've done in this model is to reduce the rail network down to 20% of its 15 to 20% of its existing system, and that actually immediately leads to people being pushed onto other modes, pushed onto cars, basically, in a sense, because buses have got the same problems of capacity in this particular context. So essentially, you can demonstrate in this model that you very, very quickly get gridlock as soon as you begin to do this. But of course, the gridlock is very variable. That picture of the map shows you that in the big cities, the gridlock is almost complete, whereas in the outer areas, for a whole variety of obvious reasons, the gridlock is less. So that's the way we're thinking about using that kind of thing for our models. Okay, lots of things we need to do. Locational patterns at different scales, new attributes to our models, electronic networks versus physical. We've not talked at all in this context about how electronic networks are substituting the physical, and that's very central to what might happen in terms of people working, living and working from home in a sense. And really, to some extent, I think this gives us an opportunity to rethink questions of distance and geometry in these models. So that really represents the challenge. So thank you very much. And at that point, I will hand back to our chairperson. I will stop sharing my screen.
Yes. Thank you, Michael. At this point, if there are comments between the three speakers, if Alexis, Denise, or Michael want to say something about the other presentation, for probably one of presentation simulate some thought, I don't know if you want to say something. Otherwise, we can pass to already I received several questions, but in this case, if you want to say something more after this.
I would rather go for the questions from the public.
Yeah, just a small question to Mike, if you allow me. Did you have this quant model representing your territory, and did you receive demands from governments or health system to play with it? As you show, you have tried different models simulating the effects of the pandemic. Did you receive official demand for using it?
Mike, your microphone is muted.
Yep. Yeah. No, we didn't. We haven't used that model for looking at the pandemic in the UK. We are still working with it, but we have used it for looking at the National Infrastructure Commission have all these projects that they're in control of, such as HS2 and so on. So we have looked at it in the past for that. But the Devon model, the other model that I mentioned, the second one, is being developed under initiative. I should say that in the UK, there are a very, very large number of academics and also corporate groups working with building models of the pandemic. In fact, the UK research councils have put something like, so far in the last 3 months, have put £200 million back into the university system for people working on different aspects of the pandemic. Now, we're involved with the Royal Society on this RAMP, which is Rapid Assistance for Pandemic Modelling. It's collected together a variety of people working in modelling, but not working in epidemiological modelling, not working with the Ferguson model at Imperial, not the standard SCIR. And as part of that initiative, there are quite a lot of organisations building different sorts of models. So we think of ourselves as fitting into this, basically. But there isn't I don't think there's anybody sitting on top of all of this with a clear view about what types of models and what kind of studies should be developed. But there are many of them, and I'm sure it's exactly the same in France and Italy. You know, different groups working with different models in this sense. So I don't know whether that sort of answers it, Denise, but it gives some indication.
Thank you.
Alexis, you try to say something.
No, I was saying that we could ask, we could go for questions coming from the audience, but I've seen Giovanni that raised his hand.
Giovanni, you can go.
Yes, I have an observation that will become a question, I think, mainly for Mike and for Denise. The observation comes from colleagues working on geopolitics and international affairs. They say that after all, what they are observing right now with in considering the respective role of the United States and China on the world stage, the pandemic didn't cause anything. It's just an accelerator of trends that were already set and already in place. So this means that sometimes those what we call disruptive events, they just disrupt routines and the way things are, and maybe some resistances to change, and they give an opportunity for trends that are powerful, but they are finding some resistance to overcome those resistances. This could not always be the case, but this is mainly the case. Where and when could it not be the case? When the disruptive event plays against the trend. In that case, it could halt, slow down that powerful trend, but be eventually overcome by the trend. Then come the highly improbable, but not to be completely excluded outcome that the disruptive event is so powerful as to reverse the still powerful underlying trend. Now, coming back to what Denise and Mike presented to us, it looks to me that what Denise was presenting are those powerful trends. I mean, these are the laws of self-organization of urban systems. Going over the centuries, they withstood a lot of those disruptive events. Globalization is fueling them, and it is highly likely that punctual crises like the pandemic we are living will just accelerate those trends. But Mike was also going in details with some examples of how things are working very locally. And so maybe we could go a bit deeper to understand whether actually we are necessarily accelerating those trends. The main trend I took from Denise was both the powerful globalization trend, but also the green transition. Now, those things that Mike is modeling, are they going to accelerate, slow down, or eventually reverse those trends?
You want to go, Denise?
What I can say to Giovanni, of course, it's very interesting but difficult question. What we see just now at the micro level of small decisions being taken to start life again after the pandemic is that there are gaps increased between the small firms or the big firms that were already in difficult situation, and they probably will disappear or be in restructures, whereas you're right, the trend towards what is called the new economy and the communication systems, of course, on the contrary, are flourishing. And then the inequalities of health, economic health of the firms can be changed by the pandemics. But what I observe as well is that in all territorial system, in all sector of activity, people try to re-establish what existed before and to do it again, and perhaps trying to be a little more green, but that's not for sure everywhere. And then that's why I'm confident that, and because the disruption doesn't occur at the same time everywhere. I think it would be different if we received, for instance, a meteorite from from the space or on the Earth somewhere. Now we have a wave of pandemics with territorial and economic systems that are starting to recover each at different time, and so it is likely that they will try to do their best to re-establish their connections with difficulty if the regions they are connected to are still in the middle of the epidemics, but this will not change so quickly because the resources are there and the economic differentials are very strong. So I cannot see, and of course it is important to think about the distance and to improve the physical models of the spatial propagation of the epidemic. But it is important, I think, locally, the inequalities in the powerfulness of activities, territories all over the world are so strongly differentiated that I can't see how you can wipe all that all at once. So on the contrary, in an incremental way, they will try to re-inject the situation of before in the future. But that's only a guess. Mike, what do you think?
Well, I think that there's no question that some of the trends that were happening are being accelerated by the pandemic. So, for example, working from home, we don't know yet, of course, but a good deal of what people are likely to do in the future is working more from home in some sense. I mean, it just so happens that the pandemic has occurred at the time when these sorts of conference systems that we now have have sort of become mainstream, really, in some senses, teaching little kids, at home using things like Zoom and so on, and this Google Meet and so on. It appears to be becoming routine. Now, I know there are many social and economic inequalities in terms of the provision of these sorts of things, but so I think that's one trend that has been accelerated, and elements of it will stick, I think, in that sense. The question of more people walking, I think, is because of fear of traveling by mass transit. That's another trend that was slowly beginning to happen. I mean, we can only speak in terms of our own local experience, but it was beginning a bit more to happen in the UK. Yet at the same time, there was a move in the UK, many Western countries, I think, there's a move to limit the use of cars. And I'm not thinking just about big cities here. A lot of controls on cars. And of course, that is changed, I think, will be changed by an increased demand. And that, of course, might interact quite a lot with new forms of automated car transport, right, in some senses. Certainly in terms of the way these cars are fueled, really, in terms of electricity and so on. So I think there are some interesting issues of that sort. Another trend, I think, which is massive, is going to be massively accelerated, not necessarily for a beneficial one, is this. I don't know whether it's true in Paris and in France and Italy, but the whole question of the high street, basically. It's a recurrent topic of shops closing on high streets because of move to online shopping. I think this could be really very serious in terms of the recovery. You can already see it. I mean, in Britain, we've only just begun to sort of move out of lockdown, and you can already see loads of stuff actually closing on the high street. So I think there's going to be some trends which were not good anyway being exacerbated, and also trends which are good being exacerbated in that sense by the pandemic.
I have two questions from the audience, and later Liliana and Margosciata. Or Margosciata, you want to say something about this topic? If you want, okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Beniamino. Actually, while listening to all three of you, it was really, I felt really honored to be here and to be able to pose this question, especially after the talk by Professor Batty. It made me think about the latest let's say, short-term interventions, which kind of were very much quoted, especially in social media. We've seen plenty of both zine articles or various other like publications in City Lab, etc., by Bloomberg and so on, about these various tactical urbanism. They already appropriated this name. Interventions which basically led to exactly strengthening walking, but in a sense, in some places, like I think the first of all in Paris, thanks to Anne Hidalgo and her politics of 15-minute city, it has been quite largely written that other cities are trying to emulate this kind of approach. For instance, in Milan, they specifically introduced a new policy which leads to the strengthening of what has already been there before, this concept of neighborhood unit. We might go back to Clarence Perry, and it's nothing new, but still it seems like this local neighborhood scale starts being more relevant in the current situation. I would be very much interested what you think about this as a part of this model, as one of the scales, which becomes more and more kind of important, and on the other hand, as an approach to the transformation process, because if we understand tactical urbanism as a first step to start the major change, then it might perhaps become a method, a kind of. So I am curious your opinion. Actually, all of you, if I might. Thank you.
Let me just say a couple of words in response to that. Yes, I think there could be a move towards a stronger localism everywhere from this, for a whole range of reasons related to the fact that although we live in a global world, you know, a good deal of what's happening in this pandemic is very local, and you know, people are thinking more about locality in that sense and support. So I think that a move in that sense might be significant. How it ties up with questions of how people travel and distances and things of that sort, I don't know. I think that's a very complicated picture in some senses. But I do think that, yes, this is an opportunity to begin to, you know, reinforce certain things, certain desires, if you like, with respect to community in this particular context. The term, which I think came out of Japan, actually, is build back better. This seems to be the thing that certainly British politicians and some academics too are talking about. So that this gives us an opportunity to build back better in that sense. So I think that reinforces this idea of neighborhood. I think the other issue, of course, is, you know, with the pandemic, the problem in Britain was with a whole range of stuff that we didn't produce any longer, that's produced overseas, and we never really thought about it. So personal protective equipment, PPE, for example, most of it was produced in China, and it was quite hard to get, basically. A lot of it could easily be produced locally, in that sense, is now being produced locally. So I think there's some issues pertaining to globalization which pertain to the relative importance of doing things locally that could well, you know, stick in terms of what happens when we recover. And I think we will recover in various ways. We may not get a vaccine, but we will recover in some senses. So I think all of these things are debating points that are very important in terms of thinking about what the future city is likely to be like and what we want it to be like.
May I add a very short reply? I don't think that events that are so rare, like a pandemic, can really affect our habits, our behaviors, our economies, etc. They have an impact, certainly, but do not modify the way through which we behave. I mean, we may expect, and you see it, a sharp increase in using bicycles for urban transportation. But this is a trend that exists since 10 years now. A steady increase in using bicycles that this pandemic will give a sharp increase for some reasons. But people were thinking of using bicycles since a long time. It's a good opportunity now to use more bicycles. But it's not that we are going to shift our transportation behavior to bicycles because of the pandemic. It will be an accelerator or a decelerator. It may, let's say, some things will happen more slowly now. So I don't think that it will change our societies deeply. Not at all. Not in good and not in bad. I mean, this is, and this is because it is correctly perceived as something that happens extremely rarely. I mean, we don't have pandemics every year. The next one will happen in 50 years from now. I mean, this one, perhaps it might last for 1 or 2 years more until we get out of it. But the next one will not happen immediately after. So it's unlikely that the whole economy and the economic behavior of the people will change because of a pandemic. Trends that exist in the society might be reinforced or might be weakened because of this event, but not vice versa.
Yes, if I may add now, I mean, in the sense what the Professor Tsoukias was talking about, I also think that, that the existing trends, and the processes, especially urbanization and globalizations, are going to continue to develop. I mean, now they are slowed down, but for sure, there are a lot of preferences and there are a lot of values developed, especially in the urban places. So now I think it's obvious we are not going to rid of them. And I'm sure that the population is not going to move away further in the countryside, And in that sense, Professor, you spoke about the values. I think this is a quite important now issue, especially because also the Professor Pumain mentioned these shocks that already happened in the past, and now we have this shock due to the pandemic. So is this the right time, actually, I think, to implement some values, But then, those values, that we need for decision making and for the new policies, the modeling, and you mentioned a lot of times to innovate design of the policies. Is it now the right time? And also, of course, this needs, some new information, some models, and Professor Batty mentioned here the very interesting model that I would call, myself, something like a model for the urbanization in the UK, So that means, that because I'm coming, from the practitioner field, we had before this kind of regional policies, we had the local policies, the national policies, but now with this model, are we coming, to the time that we have to talk about some more generic, the models, more generic policies. And in this sense, how to strike the right balance between the general values, and these local values that are very specific, especially in the urban environment. There are a lot of this kind of studies that saying that the how to say the culture, there is a special culture, especially in the big cities. There are predictions that the medium-sized cities are going to grow, but in general, how to strike the balance, how to learn and to get the knowledge for that model from the kind of environments that are today different within one country, not to mention, in general, global. So if you could make some comment, I would appreciate. Thank you.
What I could say to answer your very right question is about the economy and the pricing of cities at the moment is different. It is a kind of scaling law between the size of cities and the price of land and buildings and the rents. So when we say about there is a logic in the financial investments to be attracted in a rather paradoxal way towards the cities that are more expensive, but because the return on investment may be higher as well. And those processes, as Alexis said, we are not changing our way of behaving socially altogether. I cannot see how we could measure with our models of urban growth how strong should be an investment to be directed especially for improving the quality of life, the skill of population, the type of activity producing with the highest productivity within small and medium-sized cities. I think, unfortunately, it would be very high to reverse the trend which has existed over 2 centuries now in favor of bigger concentrations, and not only concentration but diversification of all the opportunities that are more present in large metropolis than in small and medium towns. That's why I don't think this trend can be reversed, because at the moment we have huge financial needs everywhere, and I cannot see how you could find a channel, a financial channel, to ensure that it would be directed towards a given size of settlements. And there is a gap between what people declare, oh yes, I would like to live in a village, oh yes, I would like very much to live in a small town, but what they are doing because of location of universities, because of couples having to find 2 jobs and so on. The motivations, there is a gap between motivations and dreams, indeed.
Okay, I have 2 questions from the audience, and with these 2 questions, we can start at the last comments from the 3 speakers. And the first question from by Francesco Rotondo, a question inspired by the book Mapping the Cyberspace. Probably it is the moment to integrate spatial urban models describing spatial movement and activities of people in real and virtual space, because in lockdown period, our web movements have been more important than the real one. Carmelo Torre asked, history teach that disaster, such as war and connected inner and outer migration, have been evolved in time intervals that have been measured by years. Pandemic create fluxes measured by weeks. Maybe in second case, we have to face some inertial period. What do you think about geosocial consequences? Okay, for everybody, you can also close your discussion, also taking into account these questions. Alexis, the same order, Alexis, Denise, and Michael.
Beniamino, can you repeat the first question, please?
About the importance on also mapping the web movement, not only the physical movement of people, because during the lockdown we were closed at home and probably we interacted more on the web than with other people.
Let me try and respond to that. One point that I just about made, but probably was not central at all, was that most of what I was talking about really related to physical movement. But were we having this discussion prior to the pandemic, or indeed if the pandemic hadn't happened, then it's quite likely that many of us would be talking about not physical movement, electronic movements. And the question really is about that kind of traffic, which has been extensive since the lockdown, basically. I mean, this very meeting is characteristic of this point. The big question, I think, and we've not really made much progress on this, and it's hard to see how we will make progress, is actually measuring the extent to which social and economic interactions which are engaged in digitally, what the impact of that is on traditional things such as the form and function of the city, in some sense, which tend to be very physicalist in terms of the way we get a handle on these things. So, for example, our email, our web traffic, our social media, our ability to interact with markets in terms of buying books, buying stuff, buying food, all this sort of stuff. All of that stuff has drifted onto the web in the broader sense of the word. And what the impact is on location, which is to some extent one of the handles we have on changing cities, making better cities, traditionally for the last 200 years, certainly, making better cities has tended to be interfering with their physical form in some sense, on the assumption that to interfere directly with behavior is, very ethically very problematic, but limiting physical form. So I think that this is a big undiscovered country, really, this whole question of the electronic transactions in cities and what they mean. It's very interesting if you look back. A number of people have done work on the telephone, for example. Isa de Pool, for example, Isa de Pool, I think it was at Boston or something, 30, 40 years ago. And then the guy at Berkeley who's written books on the telephone, I can't remember his name. And it's very interesting that the telephone's been around for 150 years, but its impact on the city is quite small. And I think that's largely because people have not been able to measure these things in a sense. And that's true particularly of electronic transactions. They sort of have a degree of invisibility that flows of people and flows of materials don't have in that sense. So it's a big open question, I think, this, in terms of how we think about cities. And of course, during the pandemic, this is a classic example of where we've been able to, of where we've been engaging in this very thing that we're finding very hard to understand in terms of, you know, the form and function of cities. It's not an answer, it's more a comment on the question, but it's a very important question.
Thank you, Michael. Other comments? I have another question from, okay.
No, make the third question so I can answer to all of them. Go ahead, Benjamin.
Yeah, yes, okay, Alexis, you can go.
Now, as far as the, let's say, the web movement, no, let's say how much things were moving virtually on the, no? Now, something we really have to understand, and I said that, I'm saying that because as a computer scientist, not as an urban scientist, there are things that I observe that are far different from what you see, no? Now, the web, for instance, which worked fine, no, but the bulk of what the web had to digest during the months of the lockdown was movies. No, because with the people locked down, what happened is that everybody was entertaining himself on the web, observing shows and movies and TV and whatever on the web. No, and actually, I don't know how many of you have been have realized that actually all service providers, no, slow the quality of the streaming, no, in order to allow the network to handle the excess of demand during this this period. No, so the streaming was of lower quality because otherwise the risk, no. But it is the streaming of movies that has no. It is not the rest. It's not even economic transactions and online trading that have changed during this period. No, and not even the meetings and the smart working that increased sharply the consumption of the broadband connection around us. It was movies. So yes, we have to think, we have to consider what it will be the impact of using the network. We might consider the fact that the network allowed to establish, not to establish, to strengthen virtual communities, no, which before were far less visible than it was today. No, so people today feel belonging to, let's say, communities which are not geographically bounded but are virtually constructed, no, much more than before. But once again, these are trends that already existed in the society since a long time. It is not something that has been created because of the pandemic. The pandemic has been an accelerator, no? So if we want to reason in terms, let's say, of global consequences, what the pandemic may have an impact, a real impact, is the design of health policies. Because what it has been strictly observable is that the health systems that have been locally rooted have been much more resilient with respect to health systems that are being centralized. No, which means that in a lot of countries, they might be a rethinking of the health policies. Also, no, it will be because it is something that the health working, let's say, the health workers have remarked since a long time, no, that we have downsized the health system in Europe, at least, to a level which has become critical. no, which means that the pandemic may have a consequence, a global consequence, in terms on how we manage the health system. But I don't think it will have any other, let's say, global consequence in the future. One last remark to what Liliana was saying about innovation. No, I think that as for other cases where it is time to be more creative in designing policies, no, in policy design, no, the pandemic could be an opportunity, no, but it's not the reason for it. But it is an opportunity to become more creative in policy design. No, I will not spend now my time on how we can be creative in policy design and what we can do in order to design policies. But the idea that we can shape policies out of the box, no, thinking to do things that until today we were considering as things that will happen in the far future, no. Well, we have some opportunity to, and we actually tested some of these ideas on the field, no, which means that we can implement, no, policies, for instance, about increasing the green mobility in the cities, no, in ways that before were not easy to conceive. So it is an opportunity for innovative policy design. That's sure. But once again, the demand for innovative policy design is not because of the pandemic. It is because our policies until today have been, let's say, old-fashioned. No, there was a demand in the society for innovating our policies. It is an opportunity because of the pandemic to do it. No, but it's not the pandemic that will change our way to design policies.
Thank you, Alexis. Denise, last comment.
Yes, thank you to Alexis for his optimism, and I hope he will be heard. What I observe actually, for instance, in Paris, it is true that the street where cycles could circulate have been enlarged at the expense of the cars. And there is this contradiction that Mike noted between limiting cars in cities and using the car for health reasons, which perhaps will be solved later, but in a few decades by the electric cars. We had another contradiction in France, which is anecdotic but revealing how people adjust more or less to the possibility of changing behavior after such a crisis. There was a proposal of the Commission on Environment, you know, those people who were selected by random for working more than 8 to 9 months and providing 150 decisions to help to mitigate climate change in France. Perhaps more generally. And one of their proposal, because it would have had immediate effect, was to reduce the velocity on highways from 130 to 110. And because you would have 15% less emission if you apply this all at once. And most of their preconizations were taken as very clever and very well thought and acceptable by the population, but not this one. And this one was not accepted because there was a fight in last year about reducing the velocity on the smallest roads from 90 to 80 kilometers per hour as a speed, and it was a kind of revolution locally, and it was part of the revendication of the Gilets jaunes. You are increasing the gap between people living in cities and those in rural areas who use and need more their cars and so on. You can imagine all the discourse. So I think with Alexis that people are ready to admit some change, and they have done a lot in the last 50 years. In the way society is organized, in the status of women, and the sexual orientation of people are very big societal trends. But in some relationship with way of life and or technologies, the change is not ready to be accepted, obviously.
Thank you, Denise. Okay, unfortunately, we have to close this session. In my opinion, I would like to continue for an hour, 2 hours, because it's very stimulated. We spent it 2 hours together.
Maybe Mike, sorry, if Mike has a closing remark as well.
Okay.
Just in case there is a closing remark by Mike.
Okay, if you want, no problem. Welcome.
Okay, just a couple of points. I mean, I think we've not talked much about it, but density is an important issue in many of these things. And as soon as we mention density, we start talking about housing markets and property markets and things of that sort. What the pandemic will do about those sorts of markets and the extent to which people control the density of things is quite problematic, I think. There may be some opportunities there to actually reduce densities a bit, but to get a better handle on densities, that, you know, a lot of big cities have a lot of accommodation in the center, which is used at a very low density. So, for example, in the city of London, there are 500,000 workers who come in by trains during a typical working day. In fact, I think the answer is that probably only about 300,000 people, probably only 60% of those workers come in. The things that I've seen about the occupancy are such that you have a much smaller number of people than the accommodation implies. So we have a lot of unevenness in density. This pandemic and how we may travel in the future and respond to it could change densities. Like, I don't know whether we have a clear handle on that, but that's another issue. And of course, it raises this elephant in the room about, you know, the nature of inequalities in cities, income inequalities, social inequalities, and so on, which are all related to, you know, the demand and supply of space, in this sense, demand and supply of travel. So these are sort of issues that I think are important in terms of thinking about not only how we respond to the pandemic, but also how we begin to think through what our, you know, expertise is in trying to understand, you know, the impact of the pandemic on the cities and trying to understand cities in general. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Michael. As I said earlier, unfortunately, we have to close because, we cannot say more hours because we have the closing ceremony, best paper awards, etc., etc., etc. I spent 2 hours with the 3 of milestone of my education, because for me the paper, the computable city was changed my life. The old one changed my life, but also the other paper with the book by Denise, by Alexis. I learned a lot. I also spent a lot of time, 2 hours with 4 friends, Ivan, Malgorzata, Liliana, and Giovanni. I thank you them for for coordinating, for moderating, for the question. And I would like to say thank you for the three, to Michael, Denise, and Alexis for this wonderful afternoon. I learned a lot listening to you. I continue to learn a lot when I listen to you. And I hope to meet you next year. I don't know, in Cagliari without any problem. We will have again the conference. I hope that we can. This means that all these problems will be great part solved, and we can stay. We can meet physically. Okay, Ivan, if you want to add something.
Not at all, except just thank you all for your wonderful keynote closing panel, and I think it was useful. It's all on YouTube, and I'm sure people are gonna continue watching it. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Alexis. It was really great. Thank you. Yeah, grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hope to see you next year in Cagliari.
See you.
Bye to everybody. Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Stay safe. Take care.
Okay. So I think now is the time that we start with our ending ceremony. So I will ask, just give us some time, just a couple of minutes, to all the chairs, co-chairs of the conference. I'm talking to Chiara, I'm talking to Osvaldo, I'm talking to Bob, I'm talking to David, I'm talking to Sanjay, I'm talking to Anna to join the room. So we start with the ceremony. We will all be here and going through the schedule that we had. It's not going to be a long ceremony, but what the most important part is, of course, announcing the winners of the Best Award, Best Papers Award. And while people are joining, I just want to thank Liliana and Malgorzata for their wonderful moderation. Thank you so much, and we'll see soon. We'll see soon. We'll meet soon.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
If you want, you can remain.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we are remaining.
Okay.
Okay.
Are we going to stay in this room, or we are going to Jitsi?
In this room.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, we have Osvaldo. We have Bob. So now this thing is going to get messy. So I'm going to be playing the traffic police, shouting people out if there is too much noise, shutting people down, actually. And I'm again inviting all the others to join. Chiara, is Chiara there? She should be coming. Okay, there is an unknown, so this is another person. You can. Hello, Anna. Okay, Anna is with us. Chiara Garau is coming. Okay, I'm just letting people in as they come. Rafael, great. Sanjay. Okay. Good. So I think we are almost there.
Can you see me?
Yes, we should be there. I mean, there is no one missing for this first part of the closing ceremony.
Yeah. Can you see me?
Yes, Bob. We can hear you. We don't see you. Maybe there's something with your webcam. You can maybe. To give it a try, you can refresh the page. Otherwise, we can hear you, so it should be fine. So I will project a little program for this this closing ceremony. I will give now floor to Osvaldo to give us the message, the closing message, and to start with the closing ceremony. So Osvaldo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ivan. Okay, so what to say at the end of this tremendous experience, because it was really exhausting. I confess you, it's the first time that I completely exhausted. So with me, I guess, Chiara, Ivan, Beniamino, and all people, because it was really very, very intense experience. What you say? We succeed, I guess, because numbers are from our side. I thank you so much, Damiano and Marco, for the technological support that was absolutely perfect. We do not experience any serious trouble. Probably we made also the right selection among the various technology available. So I'm proud that we have been able to run this event completely on open source platforms. I thank all the guys, all the volunteers that was the angels as usual, as in any edition of ICCSA, but this time was I guess much more intense, much more tiring task. I thanks Rafael, Sanjay, Anna, Carmelo, everyone, Margot Chazza, and everyone for the Bob, David, Wenny, for the continuous support during the year. So I guess I wish that next year will be much more relaxed event. And what we said about COVID during this very, very stimulating panels may happen, and we finally succeed fighting COVID, but let's see. So I wish all the best, good summer for to all of you, and thank you so much. Good summer.
Good, thank you. Could just make sure that you have all your microphone muted. I will now pass the floor to Chiara for some final, as a local guest.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Ivan. I join to the thanks because there are too many people that contribute to the success of this ICSA, and I really wanted to thank Rafael also for having helped me in different things, but also Beniamino, Osvaldo, and Ivan. Ivan, thank you so much for the really hard work that we did together, and I pass the floor to the next one because it was really important to thank everyone. It's really difficult to mention everyone, but thank you so much from us and from to Beniamino, to Osvaldo, to all committees, but also to all people that participated to this tremendous ICSA.
Okay, thank you, Chiara. Thank you, Chiara.
You're welcome.
Use your microphone. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to try to crash this room in a couple of minutes, because the best paper awards is going to happen like this. We will read through the names of all the winners, and when we do, we will put the link to this room on our Riot platform. So all you there who are watching us now on YouTube, just go on Riot, keep an eye on Riot in the ICSA 2020 lobby room and in ICSA 2020 official announcements room. And then if you hear your name, just click on it and join us. And if you don't hear your name, you can also click on it and join us, because I mean, we are going to have a little party like that. But before calling all the winners, we want to call first workshop organizers and session chairs. So if you're a session chair or a workshop chair or a general or main track chair, please go to Riot now and click on the link. It's going to be there in a second. All right. So it's coming. It's coming. All right, and it's there. Oh no, that's a wrong link. I've just shared the wrong link. Sorry. Okay. And just drop in the please workshop chairs and session chairs. Okay, let's see if someone joins us. I see about 100, 120 people, so it's going to be a little bit of a party here, but we wanted to see if we can crash it. Okay, in a way. Okay, is somebody join? Who wants to join? Okay, Sabrina La is coming. Other workshop organizers, other session chairs, please join us in the room. Okay, Piotr, welcome, Piotr. Mirko.
We have already joined it.
Yes. Noelia. Hello, Noelia. Okay. Yes, now the room has 20 people, and as they come, I think we can continue, but I'm inviting for this officially for the Best Paper Award session, Beniamino, Sanjay, and Anna to take the lead, take the floor, to thank all the workshop organizers, and then to start mentioning the winners, nominating the winners. Hello, Sanjay, we can hear you, we can see you.
In fact, we don't have the exact list. Is it the same what the Osvaldo has shared with me?
I think Beniamino has the final list of the winners, I think. Beniamino, do you want to thank all the workshop chairs first? Because I think and I think do that first.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank
all the workshop chairs first, because I think
all workshop organizers, because this year we have 58 workshops.
Okay, first of all,
workshop organizer, because can I continue?
Yes, continue, Beniamino.
Okay. In this year, it's quite impossible if I start to read all workshop name will remain here for 15, 20 minutes because they are very too much. But we really appreciate their job because we changed the strategy of the conference many times because due to the coronavirus, and it was not easy to manage to change completely ideas for a lot of time. And in this situation with a lot of uncertainty, we realized something quite impossible because with online conference we haven't any crashes. We finished the session in time. Just this last session we had 15 minutes more, but it was very interesting. It was not polite to cut the word to the important speaker that we had this afternoon. And I would like just to say thank you. I appreciated a lot the job that the workshop chair have done, and I hope that they will submit again the same workshop for the next year, and we can repeat this experience. I hope that can meet personally to everybody, and next year we can say thank you to everybody personally, and not only on the website, on YouTube. Okay, now we have to start with the Best Paper Award, no?
Anna and Sanjay want to say a word of thank you to all the participants the workshop and main tracks. Sanjay, Anna, if you want, you can have the floor.
Could you listen to me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much to everyone that sent their contribution, and thank you again.
Sanjay?
Yes. So should I go for the Best Paper Award nomination? Should I announce to the names of the Best Paper Award for my sessions?
No.
Which I know from, right?
The first the program is that we start with the Best Paper Awards, and Anna and Chiara started with calling. I shared the file on our Telegram list. Sanjay and Chiara, probably they haven't the last file, but me and Anna, yes, Anna can start with calling the first Best Paper Awards. In the meanwhile, Chiara and Sanjay will get this file. I will continue to helping Chiara with Anna, and Sanjay and me. Okay.
Yes.
You can, Anna, you can stop in the middle of the list, and I will continue after you.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank all the authors for the submissions, and without you, without your valuable contribution, we cannot have a success event like this one. This year, this is a unique event. So thank you all, and we will start with the Best Paper Awards. I don't know if you share or just read. Yes,
Yes, because if we share, people will see all the names, so we have a little bit of suspense, Anna.
Okay, but okay. We can show and reading at the same time.
All of us trying to pronounce all the names.
Okay, no order at all, so they are all the winners. The paper titled "A DLT-based innovative investment platform," and it was presented by Valerie Katov. Chiara, do you have another one?
The next one is, I read the title, "A bilevel mixed integer linear programming model for scheduling elective surgical procedure." The presenter was Anna Hortensio, and the session chair, I have to read also, the session chair was Ana Rocca and Umberto Rocca.
Thank you. I continue, yes? Benjamin? Yeah, okay, thank you. Another paper from the Computational and Optimization Applications Workshop from me and my colleague Humberto from Coimbra, Portugal. Then the title of the paper is "Impact of the Increase in Electric Vehicles on Energy Consumption on GHG Emissions in Portugal." The presenter was Angela Ferreira.
And the next one is Letizia Bollini with the paper entitled "Situated Emotions, the Role of the Soundscape in a Geo-Based Multimodal Application in the Field of Cultural Heritage," with the session CTP. Congratulations.
Now the paper presented by Giuseppe Sansonetti, "Automated Machine Learning Prospects and Challenges." This is a paper from FML session workshop.
And the next one is Francesco Rotondo with the paper entitled "Shrinking Phenomena in Italian Inner Mountainous Areas, Resilience Strategies," with under the session Emewe.
Now another paper from that workshop and presented by Antonio Nestikov. real estate values, tree cover, and per capita income, an evaluation of the interdependencies in Buffalo City.
And the next winner is Mizag Ketabdari, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, with the paper entitled Numerical Risk Analysis of the Impact of Meteorological Condition on Probability of Airport Runway Excursion Accidents under the General Track 1. Congratulations.
I will just again remember all the winners. Please, there is a link to this room in the Riot on the Riot platform. So as you hear your names, join the room. Thank you.
Now a paper from a general track also presented by Ricardo José Ferrari, classification of active multiple sclerosis lesions in MRI without the aid of gadolinium-based contrast using textural and enhanced features from FLAIR images.
And the next winner is Valeria Farinazzo Martins with the paper entitled A Smart Ecosystem for Learning and Inclusion, an Architectural Overview, under the General Track 5. Congratulations. Please go on.
Okay.
So,
also from a general track, the paper presented by Elnas Azmi, titled Evolutionary Approach of Clustering to Optimize Hydrological Simulations.
The next winner is Ritis Masceliunas with the paper entitled ISRA, Anthropomorphic Robotic Hand for Small-Scale Industrial Applications, under the General Track 5. Congratulations.
Now a paper from the Geo1 Mode workshop, and it was presented by Georgia Bressan. The paper titled Studying the Spatial Distribution of Volunteered Geographic Data through a Non-Parametric Approach.
And the next one is Ilias Kalupsoglu with the paper Cross-Project Vulnerability Prediction Based on Software Metrics on Deep Learning, under the session, the workshop ISSQ. Congratulations.
So maybe you can pass the word now to Beniamino and Sanjay.
No, you can continue if you want. You can continue. You can do it. No problem at all for me. You are going very well. What do you think,
Okay.
Ivan? They can continue.
No, because it's strange. We don't listen anything. So we are thinking together. Yeah, just a little clap. So okay, go on.
Okay, maybe this one Sanjay wants to give this prize. I think is from SEPA, SEPA, from this session. Okay. I will talk.
Sanjay, you need to unmute your microphone.
So
okay.
Anna, go.
Okay, I'll go on.
Yeah,
so
yeah. Me and you.
The paper is from Shaveta Malik, presented by Shaveta Malik, and the title is A Novel Feature Extractor Based on Modified Approach of Histogram of Oriented Gradients. And the paper from SEPA.
And I'm really happy to communicate the next winner is Dionisia Cuzzi with the paper Leveraging Underwater Cultural Heritage, Potential for Smart Sustainable Development in Mediterranean Island, under the workshop SIC, Smart Sustainable Island Communities. Congratulations.
Now I want to congratulate Alessandro Verenandi from U-Form workshop and with the paper Assessing Morphologic Resilience, Methodological Challenges for Metropolitan Areas. Congratulations.
Good. And the next winner, I'm really happy to communicate. The winner is Daniela Santilli under the workshop Use Accessibility with the title An Exploratory Step to Evaluate the Pedestrian Flow in Urban Environment. Congratulations.
Now a paper from VRA workshop and presented by Diego Diaz, Biomechanics Sensor Node for Virtual Reality, wearable device applied to gait recovery for neurofunctional rehabilitation. Congratulations.
And the next winner, I'm really happy to communicate that is Damiano Perri with the paper An Immersive Open Source Environment using Godot under the session VRA. Congratulations, Damiano.
Now a paper from AMUS workshop. The presenter was Lazaros Apoatolidis. Sorry for my pronunciation. iChange is the title. iChange, a platform for managing dockless bike sharing systems.
And the next winner is Silvia Nocera, I'm sorry, with the paper entitled Some Consideration on the Role of Universities and Research Centers in European Funded Sustainable Mobility Project under the workshop A2TM. Congratulations.
Now a paper from the GRMM workshop presented by Antonino Maltese. Post-processing of pixel and object-based land cover classifications of very high spatial resolution images. Congratulations.
I'm sorry, but it's a strange situation. So the next winner is Karina Silva with the paper Impact of OVL Variation on AUC Bias Estimated by No Parametrical Methods. Congratulations. Under the CAS workshop.
Now a paper from FISTA workshop and presented by Irina Astrova. The title of the paper is Using Market Basket Analysis to Find Semantic Duplicates in Ontology.
Congratulations. The next winner
now,
is...
The next 5 papers will be announced by Sanjay. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Microphone, Sanjay.
I don't have the list. I don't have the list, please.
I sent a list on Telegram. Okay, continue, Chiara. I sent a list on Telegram. Open Telegram.
I have already opened the arrow wide. Please continue. Please continue. Please continue.
Chiara.
Next time.
Okay. Okay.
Girls take over this thing. I mean, let's do it this way. It was fine. Go ahead, Anna and Chiara.
Go ahead, please.
It's your turn, Chiara, please.
Okay. Irina, we have already called Irina.
Yes.
Okay, so the winner is Mirko Tracolli with the paper An Intelligent Cache Management for Data Analysis at CMS under the workshop AAMDA. Congratulations, Mirko.
Now the congratulations to Danny Breutman for the paper Locally Provided and Globally Relevant Ecosystem Services, a needed distinction for quantification. This is a paper from the NC2P workshop. Congratulations.
And the next winner is Ana Clara Maurao Mura, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, with the paper Aerial Images and Three-Dimensional Models Generated by RPA to Support Geovisualization in Geodesign Workshops under the GDM workshop. Congratulations, Ana Clara.
Now a paper from CompAstro workshop, and the winner, the presenter was Joan Enrique Romero. The paper entitled A Combined DFT and RRKM based study on the reactivity of HCO plus NH2 on amorphous water ice surface. Congratulations.
Congratulations. And the last but not the least is Giulio Biondi with the paper Semantic Similarity Measures for Topological Link Prediction. Congratulations, Giulia.
Okay.
So, congratulations to all of you.
Yes. So now we have, this is how we're going to do it.
Okay. Ivan, just for 2 words for the procedure. Please send an email to me. I'll provide to send you, no, in next week, I will send you a form to fill. And after that, you will receive the certificate and the wire transfer, 500 euros. Okay?
Yes, good. Yes, that was good, Bermino, because this was not clear from the beginning. These prizes are not just prizes, there is money involved. So these are... So this is how we're going to do it. We have 48 people in the room right now. So please listen to me all. We can't show all the faces because the limitations are there. And on YouTube, just several faces are only shown. So I will ask all the people in the room right now to turn on their webcams and turn on their microphones, and we will give a big round of applause all together. It's going to be loud, it's going to be noisy, echo. And but do it. Turn on your microphones. It doesn't matter. Just make a mess. It has to be messy. Go ahead, everybody. Something. Turn off your microphones. That was incredible. Yes, that was something. I mean, I think it has never been done. Thank you, everybody. And I will ask you now to leave the room, all the winners and workshop chairs, because now I think we have to mention some of the most. Turn off your microphones, please. All the winners and workshop chairs, because now I think we have to mention some of the most. Turn off your microphones, please. Okay, just a second. Okay, so please, all the winners can leave the room now, but if they want, they can stay. No, it's okay that you stay. I'm now inviting our fantastic, wonderful, and patient, competent, and proactive room assistants who were dealing with, I mean, I won't tell you with what they were dealing in this session by bridging people from all around the world, escorting them in the rooms, giving them all the assistance with, I think, patience, competence. It wasn't easy. So I'm now going to ask to join. Maybe there are some of them are already on the sea, on the beaches, so maybe they will join from the beach or from the others around the town, around the city. I will ask Natale Amato, Raffaele Argiolas, Sara Cuccu, Andrea Piano, Angela Pilogallo, Federico Sabatini, Valentina Santarsiero e Lucia Saganetti. Se potete, entrate per favore nella stanza, vi ringrazio. Thank you, I thank you for entering the room. And finally, of course, the masterminds of all this, the people who have built the infrastructure that has helped us survive and go through this conference are the people who have developed the software, installed all the softwares, all the hardware. So I want to call Damiano finally and Marco to join us. I think they're already in the room. And let's again give all of them a huge round of applause. Okay? So turn your microphones and let's do that again. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Good. So now we have just two more items on our list, and the first one is the announcement of the next year's conference, ICCSA 2021. I will now pass the word to Chiara to do the announcement. Then, if Osvaldo wants to add something, if Beniamino wants to add something, if any one of you wants to add something, of course, you're all welcome. And then we will hear the final word from Bob. So, Chiara, for the announcement of the next year's conference.
The next ICCSA conference will be in Cagliari again, and we will hope to see all of you face to face in a natural and normal way, because we wanted to see you and in Cagliari. So, yeah. So Ivan.
Just the only thing, yes, it was perfect. Just one thing, not again. Finally.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. We will try for this year, but we didn't succeed. So we'll hope that the next year will be easy for all of you. Came here and see not only the picture that I put into Riot, but with your eyes. So a big hope to see you the next year here.
Okay. Thank you, Chiara. If someone wants to say something, please, whoever, or Osvaldo, if you want to say some last words before giving the floor to Bob, who should be online now. Osvaldo,
nothing more to say that other than thank you again to all of you. It was really an exciting experience.
Thank you, Osvaldo. Thank you, Osvaldo.
Thanks to everybody, guys. Okay, and thanks to bear my bad English and my very birdy face. Okay, I hope that next year I will be absolutely with a skin white like the moon, just to enjoy the sun of Cagliari.
Thank you, Carmelo. Thank you very much. So this has come to the end. I see some microphones open before Bob. If I don't see any other microphone opening, we do it like this 5 seconds trick. If nobody opens the microphone in 5 seconds, it's Bob then. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Bob.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. I was actually trying to connect my video, but it wasn't successful. But anyway, okay, let me just say something from my side. And all has been said. I guess everybody is now aware that ICCSA 2021 will be held again in Cagliari, Italy. Well, then, thank you very much to the authors, participants, and to my co-organizers who have especially to the local organizing committee on these concerted efforts in realizing this conference. So mark your calendar, and much hoping to see you in person in Cagliari in July 2021. So enjoy the rest of the evening for guys in Europe and Africa, and it's good morning for us in Asia Pacific. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you, Bob. Great. So I think I will now, Luisa, okay, I will now, I think, give a final closing word to Osvaldo to say that, like you know, like in the Olympics, there is this figure of always the final person says, "Now I officially declare it's closed," and it cannot be not anyone else than you, Osvaldo. So go ahead.
Okay. So I officially declare ICCSA 2020 closed.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, and see you next year.
See you.
Yeah, keep an eye on the website for information, certificates. We will update, try to make it as painless and fast as possible. Just give us some time to wrap up the mess, see all the documentations, and we will try to do it quickly. So thank you again, and see you next year here. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.